Hey gang, welcome back to the shop. It is Party Shop Shenanigans, and today has been a productive day, as evidenced by my dirty shirt. Hey, I've been working on my '89 Jeep Comanche with a 4-liter, pulling the head off, doing a valve job, doing a whole bunch of other work, and I'm glad that you've been joining me. Today, we're going to reassemble the head, put the valves and valve springs back in place, and talk a little bit about the prep I did in advance. Stick around. So let's talk a little bit about what it means to gasket match the intake manifold or the head. What that means is, all I've done is I've taken my intake manifold here. I've put a couple 7/16 bolts in the slots to represent these alignment pegs so that this is in place where it belongs. I'll show you a picture in a minute of the before, but what I'm doing, or what I have done rather, is to grind the inside of this port to match the gasket, okay? Here's a look at what it looked like before I did any grinding. And if you look at the red marks there, that's how much material I had to take off. So this is the intake manifold. Now, I did the same, let me pull these out. I did the same with the head. I have to take this out, turn it over so it's the correct mating surface to the head. And I did the same thing here with my intake. Not worried about the exhaust. If you look, that would be quite a considerable change in not only geometry, but whether or not I was getting into water jackets. But you can see a little bit of shiny in here. Okay, I did the same thing. I marked this same gasket that I had on my intake manifold, and I have matched my head port, my intake ports, to my intake manifold ports. Here's what the head looked like before I started. And again, if you can see, it's kind of hard to see on the cast iron, you can see the marks of how much material I had to remove. Now, hopefully this will help a little bit with just overall performance. This is by no means a performance machine. We're not going to NASCAR, and it's not, I'm not going to pick up 20 horsepower for sure. But if it just helps it run a little smoother, accelerate a little smoother, and extend the life of this engine, well, it's good enough for me, and it was just fun to say I did it. Okay, so a brief recap of what we did in the last video, and that was I did a valve grind. Now you saw me use the drill press. You saw me treat the surface of the valve and hand lap it and match it up to the surface here in the head, the valve seat, and set things up so that that was going to seal in there real nice and not any gases blow by one direction or the other under compression. 258,000 miles on this head to the best of my knowledge. Original valves to the best of my knowledge. Feel pretty comfortable and confident. I've cleaned this up and it's going to run just fine. Now, a couple things to think about is take the time to clean things really well. I don't have every carbon deposit out of here, but when it comes to things like with the valves, you see this little groove right here? Make sure that's really, really clean, because when you put this back together, see if I can hold this up here at the same time. These little clamshells, I call them, that's what's going to go right in here. Okay, to hold the valve and the valve spring. Let's just take a quick look at what that would look like. Okay, so you've got clumsy fingers here. We've got these keepers. Oh my goodness, if I could hang on to things, I'd be in great shape. We have these little keepers right here. Okay, you see how they're angled? And then this spring retention, if I could do this, I go just like that. Oof, I'm having everything but it's wrong names, but this pulls tight, okay? And that's what's going to hold the valve down into the head and hold it together. And then as the camshaft makes things go humpty-dumpty-doo like this, this valve spring will cause the valve to close in your newly ground valve seat, matched up to your valve face. Whew, a lot of words. But take the time to clean things up really nicely. You get down into the little grooves in here to make sure that the groove in here is all going to be happy. Something else to be aware of is your push rods, okay? Now the push rod goes down into the engine, and there's a lifter, okay, that's on your camshaft that pushes this up and down, and that's going to make, I don't have the parts, we'll show it later, it's going to make the rocker do this. It's going to push this up to open the valve, back and forth. These are hollow. They're a hollow tube, okay, and it's important that they're straight. Now these are in good shape, fortunately. I took everything out, I cleaned them all out just using gasoline and a brush. I took my air hose and I blew them out so I knew everything was real clear. And then I put them down, I've got a big piece of glass, I put them down on a piece of glass and I rolled them to make sure that they're straight. Now on my hand here they look crooked as can be, but trust me, they're all nice and straight. Now it might be a temptation when you're cleaning, if this will focus, to want to use your wire brush or something around here. Don't do that. Okay, you can create some damage. You want to take a look at the end of the push rod to make sure it's smooth, no cracks, and make sure where it goes into the valve, into the rod, that there's no cracks or splitting, okay? What happens is these have to be nice and clean because this pumps oil up into your rocker arm to lubricate the top end of your engine. So you want to make sure that your push rods are nice and straight, nice and clean, no signs of cracking or any stress marks on them, and that they can be reused happily. So now that I've got the head nice and clean, I've run my Redneck 12-inch file Redneck mill across here. I have gasket matched my intake ports both on my head and on my intake manifold. Got it all cleaned up here. What I'm going to want to do next here is put in new valve seals. Now what a valve seal is nothing more than, well, that. It's a piece of rubber that goes down onto the valve, into the valve guide, and your valve slips right through it here, okay? This is to prevent oils from going down into the cylinder, and because if you were just to depend on this surface here, the valve guide and the valve stem, you would have, in the compression strokes, it would be blowing gases in and pulling oils down into the cylinder. So what we're going to do, off camera, let me put this back in my handy dandy little holder. We're going to put in new valve seals. So I put the first couple on here, and they're really simply just a compression fit. Now I've cleaned all this. I can't emphasize enough the importance of cleaning things. I've probably got 3.5 hours in just cleaning materials, cleaning up the head, cleaning up the gasket, the valves, the valve springs, the keepers. You'll see all this is a compression fit. It's got this metal band around it, and this is going to fit right over the valve stem. That's as much as there is to them. So we'll get these all on. We will get ready for next steps. Okay, all I'm doing now is I'm giving, I don't want to put everything together dry into this new rubber piece here. And I'm also going to put a little bit of lube on the valve itself because the idea is here, we'll look at later, oil makes its way down to lubricate the valve stem. So before we put things together, let's just make sure that this valve seal has adequate lubrication as well. So in advance, all I'm doing is taking some of my assembly lube and a Q-tip. And let's just give each of these guys a little goober. It's my opinion that when you're assembling an engine or assembling components, you cannot have, in cases like this where there are friction items, you cannot have too much lubrication. We want to protect this as much as possible, because remember, when you put it together, the engine, when it has run previously, has oil and journals, and there are parts with a film of oil in them already. And so when you start it up and the oil pressure is still coming up to pressure, on an existing engine, you've already got some lubrication. In this case, this will all be brand new and dry, and we don't want to dry start anything. Okay, so next steps here are, I want to put all of my valves in, and because these valve guides, these valve seals are nice and new, it's going to keep that valve from falling out. So I'm going to install all of my valves so I can then flip the head over with this side up, and we'll put our valve springs in. So let's just put it together. Now keep in mind, you might have seen in the earlier video, again, we were cleaning up these surfaces so that this nice gray ring here is a perfect match to a nice gray ring on this valve. All right, give everything a little bit of a coating here. We don't have to be especially fancy with any of this, just make sure we're getting everything with a little lubrication there, so for that first start, things are not dry. What you don't see off camera here, I'll show you later, is I have to be careful, make sure I keep all my valve springs in the same order with the valves they came off of. Whenever you're going to reuse parts like this, best practice is just to make sure that you keep all the same parts mated up with one another. We'll have the same valve being operated by the same valve spring as I throw everything everywhere. We'll have the same push rod pushing the valve. We'll have the same lifter pushing the same push rod. It's just important, if you're going to reuse something, especially with as high a mileage as this is, all those parts have, you know, I'm going to call it a memory. They've developed a close working relationship with one another. So let's put them back together, because they're broke in with one another. And kind of like a good marriage, where they're familiar, so they know how to work well together. And again, remember, whenever you're putting something like this together, use a Bernie Sanders level of whatever you're going to put on here for lubrication. We can never have too much. Yes, that was a bad political joke. Okay, you might remember, if you watch me tear this head down, that I built this handy dandy little tool right here, so I can have one hand to use as a press to compress the valve spring, and then the other hand free so that I can maneuver and put these little clips in, or earlier take them out. Now, right now you'll see that the valves are in place, and there's nothing holding them up except for the friction of this valve seal in there. So I need to put my little stopper down below, because there's a gap between the wood and the valve face right now. This is so that I can compress the spring without moving the valve. Alrighty, so valve spring number 1 goes to cylinder number 1, and this happens to be an exhaust valve right here. Now what I have to do is I'm going to line this dude up here. At least that's what it says in the fine print. And then with my handy dandy little tool, come on you little booger, I'm going to compress this so that the valve stem is revealed. Now what I have to do with my shaky old man hands is put that clamshell in there. Keeper, retainer, all kinds of names. I probably don't use any of the correct names. I'm going to bounce it a couple times. And voila, we now have this valve spring is installed. The valve is in place. The valve seal is in place. I am all but finished with this valve for reassembly. So I'm going to move right on down the line. I'm going to install each of the other valve springs, and I'll be back when that's done. All right, so there we have, the head is reassembled. I've cleaned up the valve guides, cleaned everything out. I've hand lapped the valves, the equivalent of giving it a at-home valve job. Valves are ground and I think pretty good shape considering there's 258,000 miles on this, and I did not take it to a machine shop. Actually, in a previous video, you'll see what I checked for machine work. And while it might be redneck, it's good enough for what we're doing for now. I did take the time to port these gasket match, rather, these intake ports. I'm sorry, the intake ports on the head as well as on the intake manifold. So that should help a little bit. And I've got everything all laid out in order here for reassembly. Of course, I can't put in the push rods and the rocker arms, can't be installed until after this is put back on the pickup. Okay, that's going to do it for today. If you enjoy this content and my little way of doing things, click subscribe, would you? Hit the like button. Send me a comment. I'd like to get your feedback. I know there's a lot of different ways to do the work that I'm doing. Not everything I do is considered kosher. That's okay. Because, hey, if I break it, it's mine. If you break it, it's yours. But take your time. So far we've pulled the head, we've reconditioned it at home, if you will. We've ground the valves. Next up we'll be reinstalling the head on the engine and some of the fun that'll go with that. All right. Hey, thanks for joining me here at Party Shop Shenanigans. Remember to go out and make somebody smile today. You both deserve it. Bob out.